Have you ever really wanted to live somewhere and then you actually picked up and moved there? Well, that's exactly what my husband Chris and I did in the spring of 2015. We're Canadian and we wanted to live in Canada's tiny island province, Prince Edward Island, also known as PEI. So we bought a car, we drove all the way from Toronto to Charlottetown, the capital city, and we made our way actually out into the east of the island where we found jobs working in a restaurant, and we lived right by the beach, and we actually ended up staying on the East Coast for almost 5 years. Now we are back in Ontario where we own our first home and live closer to family, but there's something very bittersweet about leaving a place that kind of has your heart and that is so peaceful and beautiful. So today we're going to paint one of my favorite places in the world, PEI, and this is a photo that I took at dusk on one of my favorite beaches. This is just looking out from the top of the grassy sand dunes out at the Atlantic Ocean at sunset. And what I want to do in this video is show you exactly how to take a photograph that you've taken and turn it into a beautiful landscape watercolor painting. Whether it's a vacation photo or your own backyard, I'm going to give you every step that you need to do the sketch, the painting, all of it. Let's begin with a quick supply rundown. For the sketch portion, you'll need scrap paper or a sketchbook, a pencil and eraser, I like a mechanical pencil, a fine liner or any pen, some washi tape, tracing paper, and a ruler. Let's start with that and create our sketch, and we'll talk about the watercolor supplies when we're ready to paint. So we want to sketch our landscape. I think landscapes can be a little tricky in terms of getting everything the right size and getting the angles right. So for me, the best way to approach this drawing is to do a grid. So first of all, I'm measuring. My little square photo is 12 centimeters by 12 centimeters. So I'm dividing it into 3. So I marked 4 and 8 centimeters, and I'm doing that on both sides. You're just dividing it into 3. So if yours is, 6 inches, just divide it 2 inches at a time, and you're making a perfect grid, and it's going to have 9 squares. So you've divided it into thirds. And then here's what I've got on my scrap paper. I've got a 12 centimeter square. It's the same size as the photo, although it doesn't have to be. A grid is good for making it larger or smaller if you want to. But for this one, let's just work the same size. And I, of course, have divided it in thirds, and I have 9 squares. So now I can approach my sketch, my drawing, and all of a sudden, everything gets a little easier. Let's begin by looking at the top left square. It's just got this tiny little bit of grass peeking up in the very bottom of it, maybe the bottom quarter. From there, we can drop down. Let's look at the next square, the middle left square. We've got this wooden handrail, and it runs right from the bottom of that square. We're just working one square at a time. We've got 9 squares. We're going to go one at a time. And you can see where that handrail kind of moves through that singular square. In that way, it becomes really easy to place everything and keep everything at the right angle and the right size. Otherwise, it's easy to make one thing really small and another thing really large. The water features quite prominently in this image, but it's actually only half of that middle square, so it's not actually that big. It's just the focal point, or our eye is drawn there. So I might have wanted to make it larger than it actually is, and the grid really helps with stuff like that. I've got this sandy footpath coming right through the center. It goes on to the right square here at the bottom, and then I've got my grass falling in. This image is very, very textured, and that's partly why I chose it. You have the sand and the footprints in the sand, and then you have all this grass with those thin little wisps just peeking up against the pink sky. So I'm really excited to simplify this image and really paint the colors and the texture. So we're not getting hung up on detail, just like with my watercolor florals, where everything is loose and easy and a little bit wrong and wonky. This one is going to be all about simplifying, capturing the colors and the textures. And so with your image, you're just going to work one square at a time. And look, these top 3 squares have almost nothing in them. I'm not going to mark out too much of the sky. I'll paint that in by looking at the image. But there, I've gone one square at a time, and I know exactly where the footpath is, where the handrail is. And so what I want to do now is begin to refine. So we don't have to have it all done in pencil. It doesn't have to be perfect. Now we're going to go over it in pen, and it gives us a chance to say, okay, this could be a little better, or this should be, wider or something if you drew the handrail too thin or anything like that. We're just going over it in pen. We'll get a feel for it. We can really see what we've sketched at this point. We'll put the water line in there. And I think that's looking pretty good, actually. The grid is so helpful. The grid makes drawing less scary. So if you're worried about this part of your painting, the drawing part, don't be. The grid is your friend. And the next step is actually to trace the image. So first you sketched it using the grid, then you refine the sketch, you went over it with pen, and now you're going to further refine. So going over your sketch with tracing paper, it allows you to edit. You can change what you don't like, keep what you do like, and really get a sense for what your sketch looks like. And we do that not just to refine the image and change it, but this is part of the process of transferring your drawing to the watercolor paper. And to begin the transfer process, you're simply going to flip your tracing paper over. So you're working on the back of your trace. You're going to cover it in graphite. Just use your pencil. And then here's where we begin the painting process. So let's talk about the supplies you'll need for that. To complete the watercolor painting, you'll need watercolor paper. I'm using cold pressed 140 pound. You'll want to have your picture there to reference. You'll need watercolor paints. I'm using my 48 pan set from Muño, 2 glasses of clean water, paper towel for blotting your brush on. You'll need your traced image, a bit of washi tape, a nice sharp pencil, and a couple round paintbrushes, something like a number 8 or 6 and a 4 or 2. Now that our supplies are gathered for the second time, let's prep our watercolor paper for painting. So I'm marking my 12 centimeter square, just mark the corners, and then I laid down washi tape. That's an act of masking. I've masked my border and I'm protecting the areas of the paper I don't want to get paint on. Washi tape is great for that. And then we're going to use more washi tape to secure our traced sketch in place, and we are going to trace over the entire image one more time in order to transfer it. Remember, you've got graphite on the back, so all you have to do is go over all the parts that you want to transfer to your watercolor paper, lift that up, and you can see I've got a nice light transfer there. If you have any areas that you don't like, it's easy to erase, but now you're set up for success. And it's time to paint. Yay, finally. So if you're using the same set that I am, I know a lot of you own this set now, we're using a bit of red brown and I'm mixing that with gray. And I've got a nice wet brush. I'm scrubbing at the cakes of paint, the red, brown, and the gray. And I'm kind of mixing up these very watery, light gray browns. I've got kind of 2 that I can pull from there. Then I'm using my smaller brush. This is a number 4 round brush. And I'm going to start by painting in that sandy footpath that goes along the boardwalk there, leading up to the steps that are going to go down over the dune. And so I want to make sure that I'm capturing all the footprints. To begin, I'm using a very light watery gray brown, and I've put that light watery transparent paint on the entire area. And then while the area is still lightly wet, I'm grabbing from some darker browns, and I'm kind of just placing some little splotches and making brush marks, and I'm trying to get the look of that textural sand and all those many footprints. You can see sometimes I use brown with a bit more gray in it, sometimes my brown's a bit darker, and by working a little wet on wet, I get a softening of my brush strokes, and I get a nice texture there. So just do a bit of spotting, some messy brush marks, don't overthink it. Then I'm taking some gray, some more French gray, mixing in just a hint of brown. And again, using a light paint, I'm just going to sort of color in these handrails. So not overthinking it. This is just a nice flat gray-brown, very light in color, and I just painted all that in. With watercolors, you always want to start light and build up your color. So just start very light with that. We'll add the detail and the contrast later. And while all of that is drying, I am mixing up a green. I'm using deep phthalo green and gray green. And again, I've mixed lots of water in. So with a very light, watery, transparent green, you're going to begin filling in on the left side the dunes. I am using long brush strokes that kind of go the way the grass grows. So right from the start, I'm trying to imitate the grass. Even though I'm just filling in with light color, I'm doing brush strokes that move the way the grass kind of moves. I hope that makes sense. And then I am grabbing a slightly darker green. You want to blot your brush. You don't want to be working with too much paint on that brush. And we are going to start layering some darker green on our very, very light green. So the more water you mix into your paint, the more transparent and the lighter it's going to be. That's what you want to begin with. And then we build. With watercolor, we start light and we build. So now I've got this darker green and I'm still making the same kind of brush motions. I'm pulling towards me and I'm doing these wispy, thin, grassy brush strokes. In some areas, I'm letting that darker green all flow together because I don't want too many like little grassy brush strokes. It would just be hard to look at. I want some areas for it to just be this nice dark green and for other areas to really be wispy and look grassy. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. So using that very watered down transparent green, we're filling in. We're still kind of, filling in the way the grass would grow. So up here at the top, my brush strokes are going up, growing up, and the grass is flowing and standing straight up against the sky. And then while that area is wet, I take a darker green and I start doing these grassy brush strokes. Again, if the area is lightly wet, that will just naturally soften your brush strokes and you'll get a very organic look. So that is good. When you want to be a little more precise, we can do that later. When everything is dry, we'll work wet on dry and everything, all those brush strokes will stay exactly where you put them. But for now, we're just doing these messy, grassy brush strokes, pulling that dark green down toward the footpath and then above the handrail, making these long, sweeping brush strokes that kind of grow up and out just the way the grass does in the photograph. And you don't need to capture every little blade of grass. What I love about this photo, as I said, is all that texture. And we are going to simplify. So we're simplifying everything. We want to paint the grass with these linear strokes, the sand and footprints with these rounded brush strokes. So those are the things we're thinking about. And if it helps you to turn that painting upside down so you can pull the brush towards your body, go ahead and do that, especially when you're painting that grass that's going up towards the sky. I found changing the direction of the piece very helpful. So that's how mine is shaping up. We started very light and then we're layering the darker brown, layering the darker greens, and not trying to capture every tiny little detail. We're sort of abstracting a little bit. All right, let's let that dry, and we need to mix up some blue for our water. So I'm using light blue. It's sort of a tealy or light teal color that's right at the bottom of the Munoz set. I'm also going to mix in a little bit of ultramarine, and we're just going to get this nice dark blue. I might even put a little green in there to make sure that I do get that tealy aqua look. And then I just want to fill in the water, and it's not a large area, but we do want a bold tealish color for that water, and that's going to look so pretty, and it's going to be really the focal point of this piece. Then it is time to paint that sky, and this is going to be my favorite part. So I'm mixing two colors. I need a peachy pink and a purpley blue. And so for the pink, I'm using a light pink as well as a jaune brilliant, which is sort of this peachy color. And I'm mixing lots and lots of water in there. So we're using pink and a little bit of peach, tons of water mixed in. For the purpley blue, I'm just grabbing purple and kind of mixing it into that light blue aqua color that I had for the water. And the key here is just mix lots and lots of water in so that you have very light, watery, transparent colors. And then let's take a look at our sky. First of all, we don't have to get it exact. I think with something like so delicate like a sky, you don't want to go for exact. But let's try to capture the pinky peach at the bottom and the purpley color at the top. So I started by just doing that wash of very, very light pink. And then I kind of wet right above it, grabbed that very, very light purpley blue, and did another sort of line of color across the top. And you can see it's very light. Then we can grab from the darker area that we have on the palette, a sort of more concentrated purple, and we could put that in the corner. Just while everything is wet, it's going to flow really nicely. And as I've been saying, it's going to soften. Everything's going to be very organic, working that wet on wet. We can grab from a darker pink and kind of mix that in, and everything is softening and blending really beautifully. And then we'll let that dry. That's the base of our sky. It looks so nice. You could just leave it there, but I want to work a little wet on dry. So now that the sky has dried, I'll take a darker purpley blue and I'm just going to add a little bit. And I can always use a wet brush to kind of blend it a bit and soften it myself. And I just want to kind of make some marks, see what looks good. Painting a sky is so much fun because you can really do anything. In fact, that area was still a little bit wet, so I got some blending and bleeding there, and that's good. That softening is good. I'm going to place some of a darker pinky peach here. And as I said, with the grass and the sand, I'm going for simplified. So some of the colors in my sky, I'm just going to place a streak and then I'm going to leave it alone. I'm not going for softness everywhere. I want some just big random streaks. I'll place just a little hint of that purple right where the sky meets the ocean. So that's what I see in my photograph. And I like how that looks. The last thing I'll do is a bit of lifting. And lifting just means picking up the paint. So use a dry brush and we just hold the bristles against the wet area and it will pick up some of that pigment. And I'm kind of making a light area right through the center there. And lifting is just what it sounds like. It's a simple technique, but it's very effective. And if when I mention these techniques you feel like things are moving too fast or you're not sure what I'm talking about, remember I do have a watercolor e-course. It's everything you need to know as a beginner. It's a great introduction, and that is available on my website, shaydacampbell.com. So check it out. I may even have placed a promo code in last week's Valentine's video, the watercolor Valentine's. So if you want to get that e-course on sale, you have to go watch last week's video. Anywho, let's move on. I am just doing a little wet on dry now. Remember, with wet on dry, you can be really precise. And I'm doing some shading on the handrail and all the posts. And I'm just darkening the underside and the left side, the underside of the horizontal ones and the left side of the vertical posts. And that's just to give some detail. Again, I'm simplifying. I'm not, looking at every little detail of these posts and handrails. I just want to make sure that they pop and that my viewer can recognize them for what they are, which is the handrail of the boardwalk. The moral of the story is don't get hung up on detail. Add a bit of shading, you're good. And now that the sky is in place, I'm actually going to flip this painting upside down and I'm going to add some wispy bits to the grass here just to make sure that the grass is coming up over top of the sky. We want it to look like it is in the foreground, because it is. And just doing that with a little bit of dark green. And again, simplifying. I'm doing some large wispy brush strokes. I'm not doing like tons and tons of teeny tiny little thin strokes. You could do that. Those are stylistic decisions, and it's up to you as the artist how much detail you want to include. I'm going for a somewhat abstracted, simplified landscape here. And that's partly because landscapes are new to me. So I just want to paint in a way that feels fun and approachable. And we'll add a little bit of darker blue at the top of the ocean, of the water, just a few little tiny lines and dots. just to give it some definition. I also need to fill in that area, that kind of top of the boardwalk where there isn't sand. And I'm just doing that with a very, very light gray watery brown. Gray watery brown. And at this point, you're just looking at your image and thinking, what else do I need? I wanted some more splotchy, simplified clouds and sky. So I took a nice purpley blue and I just sort of ran and made a long brush mark, ran the brush across the paper, did the same thing with my peachy pink, weird random brush mark. And then I mixed a little bit more of a dark gray brown and I'm making some more messy rounded brush marks that look like the footprints in the sand. And then I'm taking a wet brush and kind of blending them in a bit so that they're not too harsh. And those brush marks are going to be a bit smaller the farther away they are. So the farther into the painting, the footprints are a little smaller, brush marks are smaller. You know what I mean. I think you know what I mean. And I also mixed a little yellow ochre here, and I just did some tiny little yellow brush strokes right at the top of the grass. And then I was kind of like, am I done? Am I not? So at that point, it's good to look at the photograph and just ask yourself, how did I do? My painting is definitely a bit warmer in color, but I like that. I'm seeing that I do need to do some shading on the left here. The grass just doesn't look dark enough. The dunes look too light, the grassy dunes. So I can darken that. I might put a little white through the center of the sky where I did that lifting. But that's about it. So to begin, let's add some dark green. And I'm not doing every little brush stroke. I'm doing big splotchy areas to ground the dunes and give the look of that shadow, that dark shadow that would be present at dusk. Okay, and then I'm going to grab a little gouache. Sorry, this wasn't in the supply rundown. Just decided to add it at the end. It's totally optional. Gouache is a highly opaque water-based medium. You just squeeze a little white gouache out of the tube, mix in water. It comes out the consistency of toothpaste. You want it more of a watery consistency. And then it's beautifully opaque, so you can actually place it on top of your watercolors. Do a little dotting on the ocean, maybe a little cloud in the center. Use it sparingly, and then you're done. That's it. Our painting is complete. I'm going to rinse my brush, and now we're on to the best step. You know what it is. We're removing the tape. So just carefully lift up that washi tape and you will reveal your beautiful clean white border and this perfectly square little painting. Isn't she so cute? I'm so pleased and happy with that. And at this point, you may actually want to add a little bit more gouache or something like that. I wanted to amp up that light bit right in the center. I put a few like wisps of white in the grass, and then I was for reals done. So there we go. A sweet and simplified little landscape and a wonderful way to capture one of my favorite places on the planet, Prince Edward Island. Thank you so much for watching and making art with me. Please hit that subscribe button for more content like this.